So I get a lot of questions asking me how I got into music, why I started playing, and what my method is for writing music. And as you're probably aware, my music isn't super conventional, and the reason for this is music to me is a hobby. It's always been kind of on the side, and as a consequence, I taught myself. So I'm sure anyone that studies music or has learned how to read music properly has a different way of doing it, but this is just the way I kind of do it, basically. So how I got into music, when I was young, Dad would drive me to rugby, and there was, some of the drives were over half an hour, and we'd always be listening to music in the car. The majority of the music was band music, with a huge focus on 70s classic rock, like Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, and mostly 90s grunge. So Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Stone Temple Pilots, Nirvana. They were the most common genres. So I was really into the kind of gravelly, deep voice, and the dual guitar harmonies, and the riffing, and the groovy kind of drum beats. So I listened to that kind of music first off, and then I think the turning point for me was when I watched School of Rock, and I watched that kid with the flying V, and he took the first strum of it, and he'd never played guitar before, and I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. I just thought the power behind being able to create your own sound, especially because that was the instrument that was in the music that I really liked. It kind of struck a chord with me, no pun intended. And also all the music in that soundtrack kind of resonated with me. And then, shortly after, I convinced my parents that I really wanted to play guitar, and I'd been told I should play piano, and I think I tried the clarinet for a while, which was extremely lame. And I gave that up pretty quickly. I didn't mind the piano, but I remember always telling my piano teacher, like, can you please show me some heavy metal? And I learnt like some heavy metal songs on the piano, but guitar was just the obvious choice for me. Anyway, so then in the meantime at school, like particularly in art class, everyone would listen to music, and we'd be painting or whatever, and we shared a lot of music in those classes because we were allowed to chat and kind of like listen to music and things like that. So at the time, it was like the early 2000s, so this is lucky for me, was when, not that I listen to a lot of it now, but nu metal was quite popular. So there was System of a Down, Korn, Limp Bizkit, Marilyn Manson, Linkin Park, what else? All of those kind of bands, and that kind of was like a gateway drug for me into heavy metal. And after that, like all types of heavy metal. But I still always stayed true to the roots of what I originally listened to, but it just kind of expanded my horizons a bit. And yeah, shortly after that, I got a guitar. After like begging my parents. It was just like a standard cheap $100 like nylon string as well. And this was back in the day when they had like those flip phones, and like it was brand new that you could like record a video on your phone, I remember the phone before, I was flexing on everyone because I had like a flashlight on it. It was like the Nokia 1100. But anyway, I had like some sort of Motorola, I think it was like an L6 or something. And I remember taking videos of like, I'd literally learnt Master of Puppets on a nylon string guitar. Which is like ridiculous because like you're not meant to play Master of Puppets on anything but a distorted guitar. But I was just obsessed with tabs. So I'd go on Ultimate Guitar and just look at the tabs of the songs I like and learn them like all night rather than doing homework. And I was still a pretty good student at school, but I probably didn't study quite as hard as I think my parents probably wanted me to. But I mean, it just like it made me so happy and gave me a sense of accomplishment once I'd learnt a song, and it made me inspired. I remember writing my own riffs as soon as I learnt to kind of play other people's riffs, other bands' riffs. I was writing my own. So, and meanwhile, I had a mate who was a drummer in my class, and this is the kind of year my academics really started sliding, and there's actually two mates I had that were drummers. One was like insane. He used to like tap with a pen on the desk and then use his foot on one of the legs of the desks as like a bass drum, and he'd made these insane beats. He's like an incredible drummer. And then there was another guy who I was in class with in year 9, and we used to literally we'd be in the library just listening to like he was like obsessed with Metallica. So, and I didn't really know much Metallica, and we'd put our headphones in and just listen to that like all lunch kind of thing, and he would show me like how to do like the double kick, but I didn't know how to do that. I was learning guitar, I wasn't learning drums, but I just thought it was really cool. And he lent me Cunning Stunts, the DVD, which is like a mid-90s, I think, live concert by Metallica. And they're all like, I think this is, now that I look back on it, it's like their post-alcoholism days where they're like doing push-ups in between sets and all this kind of thing. But like, it just honestly blew me away. I just kept watching it. Now that I look back on it, I know that Metallica's peak was like late 80s, early 90s. And now my favorite concerts are Seattle 89 and Moscow 91. But at the time, like, that's all I knew. And that was like awesome for me. And I remember I just exhausted Metallica. Like, I just listened to every single song on repeat. And I was especially into Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice, and the Black Album. And I still am, really. They're my favorite albums, especially Injustice and Master. But the problem was I ran out of that kind of... In fact, when I first listened to it, it was just like... I had it on my tinny like laptop speakers, and I was listening to Metallica, and it was so mechanical and mathematical. I was blown away, but at the same time, I was just like, this is just jarring. But it grew on me, and especially when I started actually playing it and understand. It's like a different thing. Once you start playing something, you listen to that instrument exclusively almost. And then a lot of the music you listen to, you can't help, if the guitar riff isn't strong, you're just kind of like... And the same thing with whatever instrument you learn. Anyway, then I got lessons, obviously. Well, not obviously, because I only lasted like 2 or 3 lessons, and I just got sick of it, and I wanted to go back to just reading tabs. And this is where like I tried like, I think 2, actually maybe 3 different guitar teachers, because I thought it was just like, they're not teaching me like metal, so, or they're not, you know what I mean? So But it wasn't that. I just liked learning myself. So I gave that up and just kept learning myself. And I learned from the age of 15 to now. I'm now 28. And, I think it was important, even though I hardly went to any guitar lessons, that I did, because they taught me, for example, they just taught me correct technique, like to bend the string, use 3 fingers rather than just one. And, just like little technical things like that. And it gave me the foundation for like reading music and understanding the basics of music theory. Not that I understood it well, but and also having the background in other instruments, but I really didn't. Okay, so this is where I move on to the next point, which is how I kind of write music. And originally I would just bang out riffs, and I don't know, I think it just came to my head. Like I would either listen to a melody somewhere and then do a variation of that on guitar, or more commonly I would just have this thing that was happening in my head on repeat, and then I'd transfer it to guitar. And also another one that's pretty common is you're just jamming, you're just playing around, and a rhythm or a melody comes up and you just keep going over it. But I think learning different styles, and people would disagree with this, but I think learning different styles of guitar playing from different bands, actually, it's like learning it's like having the English language, and then there's not a word for something, and then you borrow, I don't know, say like a German word like kindergarten. Now we've got a word for that in English. We just borrowed it. It's kind of like you learning different people's music adds tools to your arsenal to make your music more original. That's always how I kind of looked at it. So like, for example, Metallica would have, their intense, like, intricate rhythms on guitar, and then something like Iron Maiden would have the dual guitar harmonies that really made it really appealing and melodic. And then, a band like Dream Theater would have their weird time signatures. Then Megadeth had those insane like technical riffs, and then bands like, I don't know, Alice in Chains would have those insane kind of chromatic kind of riffs that weren't. I didn't understand what any of this stuff was at the time, but when I heard it or when I played it, I could identify that the influence came from here or there. Anyway, the next stage from that was to kind of teach myself, hang on, okay, now that I've got a riff, how do I make it into a song? And I would kind of just do things like change the tempo and like use the same kind of sequence of notes for a while. But then I thought, I think this happens to all artists. They look at their art or their music and they're just kind of like, they look at it and think, this could be better, or they're a harsh critic of themselves. And I was exactly like that. I just thought all my riffs, I have like 50 of them, were trash. But like, I thought they were okay, but I just didn't think they were great. They were amazing. And looking back, they weren't really. But there was definitely like a drive and a certain degree of creativity that went into them. So I was kind of happy with that. And I was always kind of like, I always wanted to kind of make my own album. Like, I'm a big believer in, you're put on this earth with a certain skill set that's different to other people, or that, especially creatively, it doesn't matter like how talented you are at like shredding, or like how heavy your riffs are, or whatever it may be. And the same thing for other creative pursuits. At the end of the day, it is different, it's unique, so it's something you can offer that's different to everyone else. But the way I learnt was, because I'd learnt all these tabs, I learnt music theory mathematically, because it made a lot more logical sense to me. And for example, so the first thing I did is I started looking at songs I liked and then analyzing them, and I used this tool called Reverse Scales. You can look it up. I'll put a link into the description so you can have a look at it. Basically what it does is you put in the notes from whatever song you're listening to, and it will spit out what scale it is. And this started helping me piece together what is going on, what am I listening to, what do I like, what do I dislike, what sounds evil, what sounds melodic, what sounds happy, etc. And obviously I found out, minor sound quite somber, and then scales like obviously major will sound happy, and then scales like chromatic scales will sound very mechanical, and then like Phrygian would sound quite evil. So I started noticing these trends, and then I started making riffs, not exclusively, but it just added another kind of spice to the writing process. And then the next stage after that was, okay, now that I have a riff and I know what it kind of is, how do I make it into a song? And as I said before, I would just kind of make a very similar riff with clean guitar, or like speed up the tempo, or do things like that, or just have a very similar riff. And I still do that, but I looked at a lot of different song structures and found that, okay, really catchy songs, they actually change I didn't understand what this was back then, but it will be I realized that it will be like a different mode. So for example, so when I learnt scales, just quickly, as I said, I learnt it mathematically. So for example, the minor scale to me is just a sequence of notes, and I think this is actually a much easier way of learning music theory. So for example, the minor scale to me on any note, so let's say the E string will be, the E minor will be 0, 2, 3, 5, 7, 8, 10, 12, those frets. And then if you start on a different note, it's a different mode, but it's the same sequence of notes. And then if you want to change to a different key, say do an A, go on the A string, 0, 2, 3, 5, 7, 8. And this literally blew my mind, because it meant I knew every scale, every scale and every mode automatically, just from those basic principles, without having to learn, all cows equal Ras, like what sharps are on what scale and all this kind of thing that they teach you with traditional music theory. You don't need to know that. You just need to know the sequence between notes and what's the starting note. I might need to do another video explaining that in more detail. But so then I learnt that, for catchy songs, the pre-chorus changed mode, and this would build up some tension, and then it would release in the chorus. So it might go like, the verse is in A, the pre-chorus is in E, and then the chorus is in A again. And this helped me write ballads and made me write songs to be a bit more catchy, and it made them flow. But I realized if you do everything like that, it's just a lot of the songs are gonna sound quite similar. So I also used the knowledge I had from bands that didn't really learn conventionally and weren't super melodic as well, and I kind of combined them together. So I would say the non-melodic bands that, they still have a lot of melodic elements in them, but some of their riffs are just chromatic. They're very they're just put together by someone that doesn't really have a full understanding of music theory. So for example, Megadeth, Metallica, and Slayer, and Pantera all do that. Whether they knew music theory or not, I'm sure they do. But I think in some periods of their songwriting, they might not have. So an example would be like Leper Messiah, Metallica, or like Master of Puppets intro from Megadeth, like The Conjuring or Wake Up Dead. Then Slayer, most Slayer is chromatic or Phrygian. And so the problem, and then there's the melodic bands like Iron Maiden and In Flames, and every single one of their songs fits into that into the traditional music theory where you have scales and modes. And so what I do is, the problem with the not as melodic bands that have like really chromatic, weird, like diminished sounding scales. They don't even know they're playing those scales, but it's just very like evil sounding. It's very hard to harmonize over them, which means to put vocals over it is difficult. So that's why, like, a band that has only chromatic, actually a good example is Lamb of God. They only have these crazy diminished scales, which they're not melodic. Like, it's very difficult to sing over them because harmonies are difficult to write for that kind of music. So, but the problem is it's more heavy, it's more evil or whatever. So a thing you'll see commonly in a lot of my songs is they'll start off on this side like quite chromatic, quite evil, diminished scales, and then they'll go to the melodic, and then they'll end again with the kind of evil, dystonic kind of sound. And there's a number of ways you can do this with the transitions. So you can start off with like a really heavy evil riff, and then make it into acoustic guitar, and then keep it acoustic, but then change it into a more melodic kind of scale with similar kind of rhythmic qualities. And I'm not sure what the music terminology is, but has a similar sequence of notes. Like, say there's the root note, then it goes up a bit, then down, then up. Have a similar pattern, but just in a more melodic scale. And then you do the thing I was saying before, where you have a certain key, and then you go into a different mode, and then back into the same mode. And then you can change this, so you can do like you can have the verse and then the post-verse in the same key, and then the pre-chorus in a different key, and not a different key, a different mode, and then back into the original mode. And then you can end with a real evil riff that goes into some like keyboard thing or something like that. And as soon as I figured this out, it literally blew my mind. And before, like, I used to have writer's block and just not be able to write. And even if I had a riff, it was very difficult to drag it out. Yeah, but this just really helped. And then the last piece of the puzzle, really, and this is aside from skill, this is just pure songwriting, was harmonies. So to do harmonies, I learnt it mathematically as well. So, for example, the minor, in the minor scale, if you have one guitar, all you have to do with the second guitar is have the second guitar either 2 notes above in the scale, or which would be either 3 or 4 semitones. I think. Yeah. 3 or 4 semitones, or you can do the inversion of that as well. So that's I think they're called minor and major thirds in traditional music theory, and then minor and major sevenths. And then if you want to sound, and a lot of the bands, like the really melodic bands like In Flames and Iron Maiden, they'll do the harmonies like that all through their music. And then another type of harmony is like the Slayer type of harmony. So it's usually like, I think it's called a perfect fourth and a perfect fifth or something like that. But it's basically 5 semitones above the original guitar and 7 semitones above. And there's And then there's an octave kind of harmony, which is just the note 12 semitones above. And then after I learned this, that was also mind-blowing. So you'll notice on a lot of my acoustic sections, there's usually two guitars playing different melodies that are obviously similar. They're harmonizing. And I learned this again by just putting it through reverse scales and figuring out what scale everything was in, and it was in the same scale. It was just, as I said, 2 notes above for like Iron Maiden and In Flames, and then 5 or 7 for like Slayer or something like that. So that was the last piece of the puzzle for me, really, apart from the technical kind of learning guitar, and also the production elements. But yeah, that's how I write music. So I've kind of gone over how I got into music, what made me start playing guitar, and how I actually write. So I can give you some examples of, the melodic songwriting and then the more dystonic kind of songwriting, and then show you how I've kind of combined both into my music. But if you have any questions, just, give me a direct message and I'll answer whatever questions you might have. Cool. Cheers.